Hi, and welcome to our presentation. We did the correlation between attachment theory and teenage addiction by Cindy Fankhandel, Brooke Patton, and Karen Ossel. How are attachment and teenage addiction related? Well, Mary Ainsworth describes attachment as an affectional tie that an infant forms with a caregiver, a tie that binds them together in space and endures over time. Since teenage years are already a tough time on an individual, this insecure attachment becomes a larger issue and can also lead to teenage substance abuse and alcohol abuse. Teenage addiction is a huge concern in the United States. It is estimated that over 90% of female opioid users are of childbearing age, and 4.5% of pregnant women use illicit drugs. When looking at ways to lower these percentages, attachment theory stands at the forefront. With a lack of establishment of a secure attachment bond during the infancy and early childhood years, adolescents yearn to feel a sense of security and go find it in other places. In Bowlby's study of attachment, secure children experience their caregivers' availability, sensitivity, and responsiveness, while insecure relationships are formed from unpredictable, rejecting, or unresponsive care. The correlation is that adolescents' alternate sense of self and longing to believe represent a product of their insecure attachment and lack of building stable relationships.
My name is Cindy Fankhandel, and I'm going to talk a little bit about teens' addiction and attachment styles. First, I'm going to start with the relevancy of our demographics. The demographics that I came up with were in one study included and in the other one left out, and I believe that was probably because of healthcare laws that are in place. What I found that was interesting about how these demographics related to attachment was in some groups, not all, but socioeconomic, and it depended on their socioeconomic background too. The Afro-American adolescents and adults both showed they thought it may be related to the way that they were disciplined while what their upbringing was while they were growing up. They had more avoidance, and in comparison to the Western Europeans that they did studies of. They also showed some differences in the way that Latinos related in more emotionality, which could be familial. In other words, the way that they were brought up, or it could be because of problems within their background as they were growing up. And it also showed a distinct difference with Asian and South Asians as being higher in anxiety levels. The reasons that these research studies are relevant to us as clinicians is because we're going to see different people within our practices. And if they come from one of these specific ethnicities and we find this kind of a thing showing up, we would immediately bring to mind, well, maybe I need to change my approach with how I'm going about my style of listening to them, rather than assuming that they're either avoidant because they don't want to be in treatment or because they're not trying to cooperate. So it would be useful to pay attention to that. I'd like to direct my attention to the next thing about parental attachment. The reason that it was stood out to me is that it involves parental attachment with greater substance abuse, but it also showed what it did was the first study of its kind. It had two-parent families only, and it involved parental attachment styles, which they took an assessment of these parents. Each one of these parents did their own self-assessment and found out what kind of attachment styles they had, and then linked that with their parental knowledge. In other words, the way that they went about monitoring their kids. And it showed that those with the greater styles of avoidance had more of a tendency to either ignore, or their kids had learned that they would ignore, so they didn't relate to them, didn't communicate with them as well. And it also showed that the avoidants tend to kind of have a ignorance is bliss approach to where their kids were. And in turn, the outcomes, actually the correlation between those two kind of parent styles showed their kids who were very young adolescents were more prone to try either alcohol or marijuana abuse. In this study, the kids also were the ones that took the assessment for what they had tried. So their answers were straight from them, whether they had tried alcohol, binge drank, whether they had been involved with marijuana use. And these were very, very young adults. So I think future studies, it would be good to go back in about 4 or 5 years and see if these kids that had showed parents with more avoidance or higher anxiety, which probably affected the parents more than it would actually affect the kids, how they were relating to if things had changed, if they had gotten worse, or if the parents had been more diligent. And it could be used for future study as a way to educate parents to the need for parental monitoring, the importance of it. And in the future too, you'd want to include single parents and different socioeconomic backgrounds. The final one I did was attachment styles in relation to treatment programs. This was with a group of adolescents that had already been diagnosed with substance abuse problems, and they were in a program with about 103 of them, and they took assessments all through, like every 2 or 3 weeks, they'd do a new assessment of each group. So they showed that those who showed avoidant attachment styles or anxious attachment styles had the hardest time to begin with, probably being open and to be able to open up in therapy and building a relationship, an alliance with their therapist. So the suggestions that came out of that were that those that showed those tendencies, if they started from the very beginning, rather than figuring this out 2/3 of the way in and wondering what to do, if they assessed them to begin with and found out that they showed an attachment style that showed more of a tendency to avoidance, not to be able to build rapport with their therapist or with others around them as easily, then work with them in a different way, or make sure that they had more advanced therapists rather than those that were just there as clinicians in training, say. I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up and send it on to my next, and that will be Karen, next person.
Great, thanks, Cindy. Some counselor interventions, treatments, and strategies that could be implemented within the session with the adolescents I found were cognitive behavior therapy, or the CBT, motivational interviewing, and even music therapy. So starting with the CBT, or the cognitive behavior therapy, what it does is it urges the clinician and the client to collaborate to change the client's patterns of the problematic thinking and behavior to increase satisfaction with themselves, others, and their surroundings. The main focus of CBT is altering cognitive distortion. There are 3 stages or phases of CBT that the clinician can implement. Stage 1 is identifying the problem, and the adolescent identifies the problem with help of their clinician and their parent. In stage 2, the clinician focuses on CBT strategies that help the adolescent to cope and reduce problem behaviors. And the final stage focuses more on relapse prevention, including problem solving and role rehearsal. And this helps the adolescent avoid some peer pressure. Now, moving over to a second intervention in motivational interviewing, I found that it was a collaborative, client-centered method of communicating with the adolescent, communicating about their difficulties with change and the possibilities to engage in different healthier behaviors that line up with their own goals and values. When uncertainty hinders a behavior change, goal-oriented components provoke motivation and strength during this time. Clinicians must implement this client change talk to stimulate the adolescent's readiness for change. And how a clinician goes about doing that, they pose open-ended questions which allow them to which allow the adolescent to reflect on their actions while at the same time affirming that there is a substance problem. And of course, what I found in motivational interviewing, the most important thing to establish is a strong rapport with a client and a therapeutic relationship. Once those are established, then the client can feel more open to share and to participate. Music, on the other hand, represents a universal language that provides adolescent clients with an opportunity to channel their addiction through a more personal and expressive outlet. I found that music therapy allows the clinician to facilitate an adolescent's development of a body presence with words from a song, a poem, or even from scripture. It allows clients to come to appreciate in an experimental way how their bodies carry pain. This is an important therapeutic strategy that I found, and it has the potential to increase the adolescent's awareness of self. Insecure attachment represents a cause of the rising adolescent substance use, affecting minority populations and resulting in strategic interventions implemented by healthcare professionals for future client success. Mental health counselors must remain current with research regarding this correlation as well as the interventions and treatments. As Proverbs informs us all, the beginning of wisdom is this: get wisdom, and whatever you get insight. Thank you very much for watching our presentation, and we hope that it inspired you and helped you to learn more about the correlation between insecure attachment and teenage substance use and abuse.